And the second speaker is Mr. Martin Ling, Mr. Competition. He's also a young practice lecturer of entrepreneurship. So after the presentation, basically the participants, either from the Zoom or YouTube, you can ask the questions directly to them, and then I'm going to give the questions to them. Thank you very much. And yeah, time is yours, Dr. Martin and Dr. Bong and Mr. Martin Lee. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning again to everyone, and we're very happy to be here, and hopefully later on we can have a bit of an engagement with some of you. But without further ado, we will be presenting on this topic today, leadership and strategy in public policy, a blue ocean perspective. Okay, so I won't belabor the point since Paoni has already given a very good introduction of the two of us. So I will just jump straight into our presentation. Okay. So this is what we'd like to share today. First, we want to give a conceptual introduction to what strategy is. Okay, we'll be using an example for this. And then this will help us to also then explain how the public sector has conceptualized, designed, and executed strategy with a blue ocean perspective. Okay, so this is how we would be framing the presentation. So if you look at this chart here, this is a chart that some of you may be familiar with if you've studied traditional business theory, right? It was actually conceptualized by a very well-renowned business professor. His name is Michael Porter, right? So he talked about this in the 1980s. He talked about how structural conditions within an industry shapes a firm's strategy. So you can see that a firm must choose two things, right? What is the scope of the market they want to focus on? And then what competitive advantages the firm has, right? So if you think about these two conditions, right, scope and competitive advantage, there really are just four what you call generic strategies for a firm. So you have cost leadership, you have differentiation, you have cost focus, and then you have a differentiation focus, right? If you want to target the total market in a private sector, for example, right? Let's say in logistics, you can compete by appealing to very cost-conscious customers, right? Or you can offer a very premium product, right? A premium high-quality product to the high-spending segments of the industry, right? So in this case, we call it differentiation, right? But if you want to target instead a small but profitable niche market, then you can focus on lowering the cost in that niche market, right? This is cost focus. Right? Or you can do this, you can also choose the strategy where you differentiate your products and services within that niche market, right? So for logistics, it might be very cold chain kind of segment, right? It's a very niche segment, super cold. So he had these four generic strategies. To give you an example of how this is done, you can see that in the hotel industry at a targeted price. So it could be low, could also be very, very high. It could be even higher than the luxury hotels, right? But they serve a specific target market only. And you truly do see this, right? In the hotel industry. If you look at this chart here, this shows how some of the many companies in the hotel industry differentiate and what we call position themselves within the hotel industry structure, right? So you can see Westin, right, is targeting mostly the leisure travelers, right? And I wouldn't say low price, but also not the super high price also that, for example, you might see in Intercontinental, right? And then you have the Ritz-Carlton that caters to more of the business professionals. Then you also have the hotel groups that are positioned at a bit of a lower price, but serving the business customers as well, right? Maybe the middle management in the business travelers. So you can see more or less the generic strategies that Michael Porter talked about in the 1980s do apply quite well, quite accurately to the hotel industry. And you can actually see this very often in other industries as well, right? But there's a catch, right? And that catch can be seen in recent years, right? In fact, in the last, I would say 13 years or so, there has been a massive change in the hotel industry, right? And if anyone recalls, in 2007, 2008, there was a very big disruptive player in the hotel industry. Unfortunately, I can't ask and get feedback now about who this disruptive player might be, but I will show you. It is no other than Airbnb, right? And Airbnb started conceptualizing, right, their idea in 2007. What happened was that in San Francisco, there was very high occupancy rates for hotels, especially during peak periods, because San Francisco is a place that has a lot of these technology conferences, right? And the hotels couldn't accommodate every one of these participants during these peak periods, right? So you had these two very innovative college students, actually. Their names were Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, right? They were Americans. They arrived in San Francisco, and what they normally did was, instead of booking a hotel, they chose to just bunk in with a friend, or they will ask a friend's friend whether they can bunk in with them in their hostel, right, or in their apartment. And the reason why it is called Airbnb was because during that time when they were doing this, they really did sleep on air mattresses. They would carry their air mattresses and they would just put it in the living room of their friend or their friend's friend, right? And then they started experimenting with this idea that maybe there were other people with empty rooms all around San Francisco who could accommodate these transient tourists, right? They come and then they go after a few days when the conference is over, right? And at a very young age, they started experimenting with this idea. They launched their first prototype somewhere in late 2007, and then they finally launched Airbnb officially in 2008. And of course, the story since then has been remarkable, right? You can see some of these examples here on the slide here. These are listings in Indonesia, right? And Indonesia alone, by the way, has more than 61,000 listings on their platform as of last year, right? Of course, many of these are located in Bali and in Jakarta, right? So the results of this are incredible, right? You can see, first of all, before I go on to that, let me explain to you again what they did, right? First, what they did was they looked across the typical or the traditional hotel industry, right? And they borrowed ideas from e-commerce, from social media, and then also from the sharing economy, which was still very new at the time, right? Nobody thought of sharing space during the time when they were experimenting with this idea, right? And then importantly also, Airbnb solved the trust issue of whether a guest would want to stay in a host apartment of somebody who they don't even know. So this is a major issue, right, in the sharing economy. Would you want to share your apartment with a guest who you don't know? And vice versa, would a guest want to stay in an apartment that they don't know who owns or who lives in, right? And particularly for a female guest, right? If you think about a female guest and she's traveling to San Francisco, she wants to use Airbnb, how does she know that she will be safe in the apartment, especially if the host may be a male, right? So this was a central problem that Airbnb had to solve. And if they didn't solve this problem, they wouldn't be as big as they are today, right? So how did they solve it? They solved this by borrowing the review and accountability systems found in some social media sites at the time, like Friendster, like MySpace. Facebook at the time already had been launched. They were running for about 4 years already. So Facebook was also an inspiration for them. And then they also borrowed from e-commerce, right? This was like the review and ranking system that e-commerce, such as eBay and Amazon and Craigslist, had implemented at the time, right? And next, and this is more recent, they created new experiences for guests by tapping on the host's local knowledge. So it's not just about staying in an apartment, right? It's not just about enjoying the facilities in the apartment, but also actually there's a social component to it also. Right? The guests can come in, they can talk to the host, be friends, and then the host can take them around if they like. And Airbnb took that practice and of course they elevated it. So today you have this thing called online experiences in Airbnb, right? And especially today where people can't travel, you have virtual online experiences. So totally new value proposition from Airbnb, right? Which hotels do not have. And importantly also, they don't own physical assets. Right? This is how they avoided very high costs that hotels typically have. Right? They don't own the property. Right? They operate only as a platform to match guests and hosts, as a trust platform, right? And a payment gateway. Right? And then lastly, as in the San Francisco case, right? Homeowners who had idle space now suddenly had this ability, right, to sell this idle space, right, to people who might want to use it for a short while, right? So this opened up a very new markets, especially to retirees, to single people with maybe one more bedroom that they don't use, and also to rural homeowners who didn't used to think that people would want to stay in a farm, for example, or outside of the city, right, where there's fresh air, or maybe near a lake or something, right? And all these people now started to see that, hey, we could actually have some form of passive income now, from Airbnb. So this is what we call in Blue Ocean strategy the people proposition, right? All of a sudden you have a lot of people now seeing the value of being on Airbnb and using Airbnb, right? And that's how they were able to draw in so many people into their platform. And you can see the results of this, right? You can see Airbnb in 2007 had almost as many, in fact, it's probably more now, right? Almost as many rooms as the top 5 hotel chains in the world, including Marriott, Hilton, Wyndham, and all these hotel groups, right? So it's grown tremendously in terms of revenue as well and profits, and also the valuation of the company, right? You can see Airbnb surpasses the top traditional hotel chain, which is Marriott, right? And in fact, if you put Marriott and Hilton together, I don't think it even equals Airbnb's market capitalization as of this month. Right? It's valued, the market has valued it at somewhere around $107 billion in USD. Right? So the rise of Airbnb, you can see taking on a perspective that was different from what the traditional hotel groups took, has been incredible, right? And this is a lesson here in how, instead of structure shaping strategy, which is what we normally learn in MBA classes, right? Instead, strategy should or ought to shape industry structure or environmental structure, right? And this chart here illustrates this concept, because you can see that had Airbnb played in the same industry space as those companies that you saw earlier, they would have been trapped right? They could either play in the leisure segment, business segment. They had to differentiate themselves, either offer to very cost-conscious customers or offer to premium, high-spending customers, right? But instead, Airbnb chose not to do that. They chose to create their own new market space by looking across their industry. And this resulted in the creation of new customers into that industry, customers that maybe never used the traditional hotel industry as often as they would like, right? So this chart illustrates that. Now you can see the hotel industry is much larger than what you would otherwise think it is, right? And to explain this concept a little bit better, right? To see how it might apply or how it has applied in the public sector field, Dr. Bong will now share with you an interesting case study, right, that has happened in the last 10 years or so. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Martin, and thank you everyone again for giving me this opportunity to share some of the work that I myself and my colleagues are personally involved with. Now, Martin has just talked about in strategy, typically we come out with our strategy based on what is given by the environment. So then we have no choice but to arrive at either differentiation strategy, high cost, high price, or mass strategy, lower cost, and more affordable features, or sometimes niche. And you also heard from Martin to say that that need not be the case. If you think carefully, using blue ocean perspective, you can break yourself out from this constraint of the environment. You can come up with strategy that is brand new, that is creating a brand new markets for yourself, a brand new value for yourself. Then you ask yourself, will this be applicable only in a commercial world, or strategy is just a way of thinking? Strategy is only a way of thinking. It can apply in a commercial world, it can apply in the public sector. Now, what I'm going to share with you is a case that has been running for almost 10 years now. And it is a case that we were part of the program from inception to executions for many, many years, working hand in hand with our client. One of the government or civil public sector in this part of the world. I like to use this as a tourism as an industry to start off to tell the story we went through. You know, tourism has been a very, very good development for social and economic development for a lot of emerging society or country or economies. Because we, especially like say you look at ASEAN, we have been endowed, okay, but with a lot of things, attractions that tourists from many places, from developed world, from emerging economy would like to come and enjoy. So tourism industry is a very important industry for most government. It is so important that it actually has got a lot of social positive implication and economic implication. Just give you some statistics. You look at it. In ASEAN, the tourism just in 2015 is 300 over billion US dollar. It's a growing market. Okay, I know last year pandemic, but it was growing and it will continue to grow. Can you imagine we all now dying for the pandemic to be over? You know, we want to travel. The first thing I want to come to Indonesia. You know, I miss Indonesia very, very much. I used to visit almost every month. Now, look at Indonesian tourism. At that point in time, it's growing almost 10%. I mean, contribution to GDP, not growing. Contribution to GDP is about almost 10%. At a certain point, it's more than 10%. So it's an important element for economic development and social development. And a lot of rural population, because of the tourism, they have a source of foreign income from tourists, even internal as well. Important. But the problem is, when a country embark of developing the tourism industry, they invariably create some form of social divide. The divide between the rich and the poor, between the urban population and the rural population. So this inequality creates some difficulty in the society, one of which will be some petty crime. Okay, for example, there are a lot of petty crimes, snatch, theft, those small little crime, petty crime. So this actually is a result of a very fast development on one hand using tourism, and then there is a social divide between the rich and poor and the rural and the urban population. Invariably, unavoidable. But thanks to the police forces of all this country, they are very hardworking, because the politicians is under, or the government is also under a lot of pressure. On one hand, if you don't solve this problem, your own people will be unhappy. If you don't solve this problem, you also cannot develop your economic development, because tourism will not come. You get a bad reputation of your country. So what do? So they work very hard and catch all the petty crime offender and throw them into the prison. Now the problem is that you do that, okay? Now you can have a lot of petty crime offenders. You may not have so many murderers, right? But you have a lot of petty crime offenders, you throw them in the prison become overcrowding. You look at the prison, is the Manila city jail, overcrowd. 518 inmates into 170 for the space of 170 only. You look at just not Manila, you look at Bangladesh. Bangladesh is also the same. Now, if you look at typically, okay, in our ASEAN neighbors, is 500% of capacity. Okay, now look at overall statistic in the world. If you look at the statistic in the world, occupancy level is over capacity by almost 400%. Okay, you can check, and you want to reference your own country, you can look at that, how many percent overcrowding. So it is, then you ask yourself, why is it overcrowding? Because it takes a lot of money to build more prisons, and it takes time to build more prison. And when you build more prison, and you need to manage the prisoners, does it solve the problem? It doesn't solve the problem, because petty crime people come in for a short, maybe they get jailed for about a few months and they get released. Now, prison is meant to do two things. When we find somebody who is an offender, if it's a serious offense, a murderer, you incarcerate them. They go for incarceration. It means you lock them and keep them safe from society. But petty crime offender, you should not do that. You should reform them. You should find a way to make them become good and responsible citizens again, right? But if you have overcrowding prison, you cannot do that. So what will happen? We go into a situation we call a vicious cycle of recidivism. Recidivism is revolving door. Let's say, for example, somebody just because of the social inequality, the fast development of one sector, like economy, and rural, urban development, not the same speed. Somebody get forced into petty crime. When you have somebody who's a petty crime, you throw the person into prison. You should not be throwing him to the prison for the purpose of incarceration. You should be throwing him to the prison for reform. But because of overcrowding prison, you actually mix the petty crime prisoner with the hardcore prisoner. So when the hardcore prisoner very happy, because a hardcore prisoner served 20 years of jail incarceration, you have petty crime prisoner come in for 3 months, they make good friend, they make good connection, and actually the police force actually do recruitment for the hardcore prisoner, for runner. So the petty crime prisoner come in, they know the hardcore prisoner, they become a runner. After 3 months, they go out. Okay, they actually now upgraded, like going for advanced school, like that, MBA, you know? They upgrade their skill for crime and network for crime. They become gangster. They commit more serious crime. They can go back to the prison again. So this is called a vicious cycle of recidivism. So instead of reforming a petty crime offender to put him back to society, you make them become the runner of serious crime offender, and they make them become serious crime offender. And that's why this problem can never be solved. This is not the problem of one country. It's the problem of our world and our society today, especially the pace of economic development. And the divide continue to be between the rural and the urban population, the rich and the poor. Now, the question is that no country has ever been able to solve this problem, because this problem is not a prison department problem. It's a social problem. Although the problem seems like a prison department problem, it's not a social problem. So how do you solve the problem? So then when we were brought in to look at this problem, we asked ourselves, what if we could find solution to solve this problem, okay? With all, look at it with all the different ministry, can we all sit down and look at it as a social problem, and it's not just a prison department problem? Okay, then that's where the example is like Airbnb. Can we not be confined by the existing policy? Can we look across different ministry, look across different policy to find a solution? So I want to show you this picture here. You look at this picture. What does it tell you? Is it a big prison? Is it a small prison? No. One of them is a military camp. One of them is the prison. But they look the same. Actually, they are quite the same, you know. Prison is to guard people from running out. Military camp is to guard people from running in. But they have the same. They are about the same. They are secure location, in other words. Now, the interesting thing is that, okay, there are a lot of military camps that in this particular country that we are working with, there were a lot of military camps. And the military were looking for more active contribution to the society. But they are not given the role to have more active contribution to the society, and yet they are military camp, a lot of them everywhere in the country. And military camp is very difficult to maintain, you know. After the Second World War, they have a lot of these contractors who would maintain their camp, about 40,000 of them, but they have come to the age when they are old, they are retired. Their children don't want to become the contractor to maintain the cleanliness, to paint the camp anymore. They all want to go down to the city to work. So military camp also got problem maintaining themselves. Yet they want to contribute to society, but they cannot contribute to society. So what if, you know, we sat down and said, look, is it possible to, instead of housing the petty crime offender in the prison, where we have to spend a lot of money to build more prison, and even though we build more prison, they mix with the hardcore offender, they become repeat offender. The recidivism problem doesn't solve, and you have more money. So how do we do that? So can we put the petty crime prisoner in the military camp. You need to look across policy, across ministry to solve this problem. The answer is yes, it can be done. Then we also did a study and said, when you have this petty crime prisoner, you want to reform them. You don't want to you want them to lock away like the hardcore, no? Incarceration, you know. So how do you do that? You bring the reform officer outside of the prison and reform them in the military camp. So the military camp just modify some of the barracks and house them there. So the reform is done outside. And also you need to give them some support. Do you want to give them motivation so that they will not repeat the crime? So you need to allow their family to visit them, not in the prison environment. Go to the military camp and visit them. So the family can visit them very regularly and not having the fear of looking at other hardcore prisoners. And at the same time, we say that how can we make sure they do not repeat? This is what is done, okay? We make sure that while they're in the prison, in the military camp, they not only clean the camp, okay, solve the military problem, we also use the land to cultivate high-yield crops, like, you know, all the chilies, things like that, high-yield crop. And when they sell the crops, all these producers, when they sell it, the profit is shared between the military pension fund, the prison pension fund, and more importantly, to the prisoner's family. So the prisoner family get an income for the work that their father or mother or family member work hard while in the military camp. So when this happened, suddenly the respect of the family member for them become positive. And with this respect from the family, from them become more positive, they also treasure it, will not want to repeat the offense. They now have got respect. They say, okay, now I know how to feed my family. And by the way, I learned this skill, I want to. And this has to be done across another industry, agricultural industry. How do we collaborate with agricultural industry to make this happen? We also collaborate with vocational training school. Vocational training, when they're in the military camp, they can service vehicle, learn how to become a mechanic vehicles, things like that. Now, all these things that we equip them with a skill. Number one, they earn a living. Number two, they earn the respect from a family. Number three, once you have the respect, you don't want to repeat the offense anymore. And that was how looking across ministry could solve the problem. Now, during the 6th CAPAM, CAPAM stands for Commonwealth Association of Public and Management, this society, and on 6 in 2016, all the SecGen and the Chief of Civil Services of the different industry actually went to visit. They went to visit this program because they're very, very interested in this program. Now, why were they so interested in this program? It is because this program, okay, now you know which country it is now, okay? Now, this program, altogether, we actually created 6 of this center in 6 military facilities, okay? Can you imagine that if we had to build a prison, a new prison, it's about 250 to 300 million ringgit to build one. And it would take a number of years to build one. And it will take many more ringgits, a lot more ringgit to maintain it. And by the way, even you build more prison, you mix the petty crime offender with the hardcore, you never solve the recidivism problem. And most of all, nobody wants prison to build in their neighborhood. So it's a very, very unattainable solution. But if you create 6 rehabilitation centers, the 6 of them only cost 30 million. 30 million for 6 of them versus one new prison, 300 million ringgit. They save altogether almost $1.6 billion for this project. We call this project CRP, Community Rehabilitation Program. We don't call it imprisonment because petty crime, we believe that they can be reformed and they should not be cast away in a society and make them become serious offender. Now, if you look at it here, up to recently, there are 39,000 petty crime offender went through this program, and the recidivism rate is 0.5%. Only 0.5% is the recidivism rate. Do you want to know what is a normal recidivism rate? The normal recidivism rate across the world is above 50%. Above 50%. Now, this program achieves 0.5%. Now, so if you look at this program, this is a program that brings us through a thinking process that breaks away from tradition and a behavior that cut across multi-agency and ministry collaboration. And the outcome of this is very high outcome, social impact, but with very little cost and executed with rapid time. Every program, everyone we can execute it almost within weeks. You know, the first rehab center or the CRP was done within weeks. That's why it's the 6 of them only 30 million versus one prison $300 million. So we solved the overcrowding problem. When the overcrowding problem is solved, we immediately cut off the vicious cycle. We solve the recidivism problem, and we reduce all the costs and the social risk. The most important of all, you can see this program that while we look across multi-ministry and boundary and focus on problem that we want to solve, not constrained by the conventional public policy, we are able to drastically reduce the recidivism rate, bring the offender back to society, and make sure that, okay, this is done at the lowest cost possible. And this project has been visited by many ASEAN leaders in 2006. So blue ocean in prison sector is the value proposition is good for the prison, military, as well as the offender themselves and their family. High value. They do not repeat their offense anymore. And good for the government because it's so low a cost they came out with to solve the problem. A fraction of the cost and the time and the resources. And good for the stakeholder, the whole society and the neighborhood as well. They do not have to worry about prison being built around them. So this is a typical example of how public policy had adopted blue ocean thinking process from conception to execution and created results that benefiting all stakeholders in the society. Okay.
Okay, so that's Malaysia for you, a next door neighbor, right? Very close to home. I'm going to now travel a little bit further, okay, to a different region. You can see in the picture here, this is in 1965, this is how this place looked like. I don't know if we can get some rapid answers here, but maybe have a little think about where this place is or was in 1965. This is the airport of this city, right? You can see single terminal, single runway. right? And I will show you as well how it looked like in 1990, right? 25 years later, still quite undeveloped, I would say. There's still a single highway running across with very few multi-story buildings, right? And the next slide, you will definitely know what place this is. Okay, exactly, as I see one response. You're right. Okay, so this is Dubai. 16 years ago, it was also quite undeveloped. You can see on the picture on the left. But today, you know, we all know the Burj Khalifa, right? Is the iconic building in Dubai city center, right? It's a metropolis, right? It looks like Shanghai almost, right? And all the other global cities around the world. But development was not a linear, gradual process for Dubai, as you can see in the pictures that you've just seen, right? In fact, for Dubai, they discovered oil in 1966. So a year after the first picture, they discovered oil in one of the fields on land, right? Within Dubai's territory. And then they exported oil for a bit, but still development was not gradual, not progressive, so to speak. It was only in very recent years that the development has been exponential, right? And it's quite strange because in recent years, actually, Dubai's oil reserves have gone down significantly. And there are some estimates that say that Dubai within 10 to 15 years, right, will no longer have oil, whether offshore or onshore. They will no longer have oil to export to use. Right? They reached peak oil somewhere in the 1990s, actually. That's the peak production of oil. Right? And yet, most of the development actually took place long after that. So how was this done? Right? This is a story about national development journey over several decades. And I'll explain to you here how Dubai's blue ocean perspective allowed it to develop so rapidly, despite it not using its most obvious resource, right? And I want to pose you all a question. This, again, speaks about structural conditions, right? Which we talked about earlier on. So the question is, did structure shape the strategy in Dubai? Right? So I give you some examples of structural conditions, right? So of course they had very large oil reserves, right? Not just Dubai, but the wider UAE, right? One of the largest oil reserves in the world. And then, of course, in the mid to late 20th century, their economy and their own survival depended a lot on the sea. Dubai is a seafaring nation, right? So fishing, a kind of small pearl cultivation industry, small and at that time also slowly disappearing. Right? Then, of course, as many of you all know, this region was marred by very regular conflict, right? And also foreign intervention, from the Arab-Israeli conflict to the Iranian Revolution in the 1970s, right? And then later on to the Gulf War in the 1990s. So this was a region that was very risky, highly volatile, right? And Dubai was also part of a larger federation made up of many more Emiratis, right? At the time, it wasn't just Dubai. Dubai is not just a state by itself, right? They were also part of the UAE. So this is their structural conditions. And you might wonder, okay, given these structural conditions, right, there are certain strategies that are clear cut, right? Let's just do what a lot of oil exporting countries do, which is let's just sell our oil. Let's find as many oil concessions as possible, maybe sell it off to a foreign oil company, allow them to do the extraction and the exploration, and then we earn revenue from that. That's the most clear-cut strategy that they can choose from, right? And maybe the other strategy option, the obvious one, is to be a base, a military base for all these other countries around the region and also globally to launch operations from, right? We see that in some parts of the Middle East where they have many foreign bases on their land, you know, and they act almost as like supply depots for these other countries. So there are certain strategy options available for Dubai in the late 20th century that would have seemed obvious had they just adopted or gave in to their structural conditions, right? But you see that this wasn't quite the case. If you look at this chart here, you can see this is a illustration of oil dependency in the GCC countries, right? The Global Gulf Cooperation countries, right? And in 1988, between 1988 to 2002, you see that UAE's oil dependency was high, but it was already much lower than their comparable countries who were also oil exporters, right? Oil production accounted for about slightly higher than 50% of Dubai's GDP, right? Compared to some others like Saudi Arabia, where it was almost two-thirds, right? Two-thirds of their GDP. And today, or in very recent years, you can see that has changed dramatically. Okay, for UAE, their oil production's contribution to GDP is now less than 1%. Less than 1%, which is the most diversified economy among the Middle East. Okay, and this chart also emphasizes this point. You can see that typically, right, if you are an oil exporter, okay, your real estate property prices in your country are very correlated, strongly correlated to oil prices. But this chart shows that even before 2010, Dubai's real estate prices was already a very low correlation to the price of crude oil. It was less than 0.4%. And over the years, it's gone up a bit, it's gone down, but generally it has gone down. Now it is less than 0.2%. So Dubai is now seen as no longer an oil economy compared to its other neighbors, right? And this is quite remarkable, right? Because had they waited longer, had they waited 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they would have been facing a crisis if they had not diversified, because their oil reserves are slowly depleting, right? And not just that, but globally as well, there is a change now to use more sustainable types of energy, right? So oil has become a very volatile commodity to go and mine, to go and extract, to go and sell, to go and have your economy depend on it, right? But Dubai had one advantage, had another advantage, not just its oil, right? If you look at this chart here, this is quite a recent chart, right? It shows Dubai's flight routes. Dubai's national carrier is Emirates, right? One of the top carriers in the world, right? And you can see these are their flight routes from Dubai to the rest of the world, highly connected, right? You know, from Europe to Asia, and especially to Australia, right? Almost anyone who travels this kind of routes between these two continents has to pass through Dubai, whether you like it or not, right? Because the journey is often very long, can be 14 hours. And if you want to split your journey, you often have to stop over in Dubai. Some other people will choose Singapore as well, right? But Dubai is very centrally located. So this was one of their advantages, right? And taking a good look at their structural conditions, taking a good look at what were their natural competitive advantages, right? they reimagined their strategy. Dubai decided instead of just exporting oil and relying on resources, right? They were going to look across beyond their existing customers, who were the oil importers, and they were going to look to foreign investors, supply chain firms, corporate HQs, and today, of course, mass market tourists, right? So they looked across their existing customers. They said, is there a way to draw these other people in, these other people who were, they are non-customers at the time, you know, they were not interested in Dubai, right? And bring them in and have them have a stake in Dubai's future, right? So what did Dubai do? They invested in and they provided this very attractive regulatory infrastructure. Right? So they spent a lot of money in the early, in the late 20th century and even in the early 2000s, developing their shipping ports, developing their airports, their telecommunications systems, right? Their electricity systems, and especially these free trade zones, right? Dubai is now famous for these free trade zones. In the 1970s, 1980s, they had only one major free trade zone, right? And this was the Ali Jebel free trade zone, right? And they made most of their money from this free trade zone. But today, Dubai has over 30 free trade zones. You have, you know, very fancy names, you know, Internet City, Media City. I think there's another one called the Academic City. So all these free trade zones serving as hubs for certain industries and certain corporate HQs, right? And they invested a lot into these free trade zones, right? They didn't just provide low tax regime or no tax regime in these free trade zones, but Dubai was very innovative. They created separate legal regimes to govern these free trade zones. So these legal regimes are separate from Dubai's historic legal regime. So outside of those free trade zones, Dubai's law, of course, has jurisdiction. But within these free trade zones, especially with respect to financial transactions, right? It is governed by these special legal regimes. Right? And they brought in these foreign experts to design these legal regimes in order to make it attractive for foreign investors to set up their base there, right? And if you go and Google, you will find that some of these, the chief justices of some of these legal regimes are not even Emirati. In the past, the first one was a British man. So they even went to that extreme to make it international free trade zone, right? So a company could now come in, set up very quickly their corporate HQ, and plug and play into Dubai's regulatory infrastructure very seamlessly, right? And you might wonder, okay, there's no tax, no income tax in Dubai till today. Corporate tax is, for the first 15 to 50 years or so, can be zero, right? So how do they gain revenue, right? And they mostly did this by taking advantage of, now there are so many of these travelers, so many of these business travelers and cargo coming in to take advantage and exploit Dubai's infrastructure, right? And that is what Dubai profited from. They had a holding company called Dubai World, which is a massive holding company that the Dubai government wholly owns, and which then runs their free trade zones. And the expertise gained from these operations is then exported to other places. So Dubai World is now a majority investor in many other foreign ports because they have had many decades of experience running these ports in Dubai. Right? So that was their business model and still is. And that is how Dubai has managed to earn a very steady income over the years that is totally non-dependent on oil. And then, of course, the very attractive value proposition for expats, the zero income tax, right, has made Dubai now one of the most cosmopolitan city centers in the world, right? Many of you know this, but the vast majority of Dubai residents, 92%, right, are non-Emirati. A lot of them are South Asian, British, Canadian, American. They all come to work in Dubai. And now if you walk around in Dubai, there are places where you might not even be sure you're in Dubai, because all of these expat communities have created their own little spaces. Okay? So Dubai is a truly international city now, and their value proposition to the rest of the world with this blue ocean strategy has been radically different, right? And I give you a excuse me, I give you a comparison here. Okay, this is Shanghai's value proposition, right, with Dubai's global value proposition. You can see this chart illustrates how divergent Dubai's value proposition is from other global city centers like Shanghai. Right? You have very transparent and international judicial systems within Dubai that are not related to, or they're not dependent on Dubai's existing legal system, right? So that has been a completely new innovation on Dubai's part, right? And Dubai, importantly, also allows 100% foreign ownership of firms within their free trade zones, unlike many other city centers where you may require a local director, right? And for many firms, they will often go and find their local director through corporate secretariat services, right? They will go and enlist one of these companies to help them find a local director. Whereas in Dubai, you don't need to go through this process because you can set up entirely a foreign operation within these free trade zones. And then, of course, with other things like corporate tax rates, import and re-export duties, Dubai has made sure that they offered a very low regime for these type of tax liabilities for corporates. Right? So very different from how Shanghai positioned themselves globally. Right? And you can see the performance of this strategy in terms of how many foreign direct investments it has managed to attract over the years. You can see that this year, the UAE, which Dubai is a part of, has been ranked the top global FDI destination for investors, right? And its FDI stock has increased very steadily over the last 15, 16 years, right? Today, it is about 80 billion plus in FDI stock. Okay, so extremely good performance, and also in its global rankings for livability and its attractiveness to expats, right? For one thing, the ability to live abroad in Dubai is easy because the business language is English. So there isn't really a need to understand Arabic. Arabic is still the official language, but you can more or less do business in English if you were doing business in Dubai, right? And in terms of safety also for expats, which is very important, right? They're ranked almost close to the top of safe cities in the world. So all around, Dubai has now completely changed their strategy from the 1960s when they were still exporting oil to a large degree, right? To switching gears completely and looking across to a different set of customers that they could appeal to, and that no longer were sort of dependent on Dubai for its oil, right? And this has allowed Dubai to now stand on its own 2 feet. They are, together with Abu Dhabi, the two major emirates within the United Arab Emirates, and they have a lot of say. In fact, Dubai and Abu Dhabi are the only two emirates that have veto power within this UAE Council. And that's primarily because Dubai has over the years been able to stand on its own 2 feet, been able to offer a value proposition to the rest of the world that is sustainable. And so people have now a stake in Dubai. And that's why Dubai is able to now say that we have our own voice now, and they are more or less autonomous within the UAE system because they are a very strong city within that federal system. Right? So this is an example of how a national development journey has been able to adopt a blue ocean perspective to solving a very complex structural condition at the time. Right? I showed you some of those structural conditions. Right? It would have been easy for them as a whole country to say we want to go down a certain path. But the challenge is in saying maybe we can carve our own strategy using some other competitive advantages that we might have and using our own wits and creativity. Right? So here I want to give a very short wrap up of what we have shared with you, both in the Malaysian case and also in the case of Dubai. Right? And we hope that we have demonstrated to you during this lecture how a blue ocean perspective has given public policymakers a different set of eyes, right? Almost like a new toolbox to look at very challenging and complex problems. You can see it in action in the two case studies that we presented. Right? One is a national development journey. The other is at the interagency level within Malaysia. Right? And the key point that we would like you to take away is that a blue ocean perspective in public policy always starts with a problem. Right? It is the same like in the commercial world. Okay? We always start with this problem, right? And then designing a strategy to solve the problem, not just from within the existing structure. Right? In public policy, it might be within the existing structure of single ministry or single agency, but instead looking across the public policy domain, and sometimes even outside of the public sector to the private sector, looking across for a game-changing solution. Okay? And the other key point is that a blue ocean strategy should aim to achieve very high value for its stakeholders, high value or high returns for its stakeholders at a very low cost or the lowest cost possible. And importantly, it should be done rapidly, rapid execution, right? Because we want to be able to accomplish quick wins, right? And we do this because early success is very critical in obtaining buy-in from key stakeholders. And we all know that in the public policy sector, there are often many more key stakeholders than, say, in the private sector even. So the idea that getting quick wins is important is very, very important in blue ocean strategy, right? And this ensures that the project is sustainable over the long run, right? So we must be able to get high value at low cost and rapidly executed. And all of this must be designed from and planned into the process from the beginning. So that is a blue ocean perspective in brief. I will turn now, Dr. Bong, if you have any.
No, I think we can take some questions.
Yeah. So before that, I just want to say that if you have if you need any more information on what blue ocean is, what blue ocean strategy is, what the Blue Ocean Global Network, which we are from, is, you can go and take a look at this website, BOGN.com. If you need to contact us, you can also write to my email address. So without further ado, we can take some questions. I think we have some time. Pak Oni?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Bong and also Mr. Martin for the comprehensive presentations. And we have some question actually from our participants today. But Dia, can you, just open your video and unmute yourself. So you want to ask the question directly? Halo, Mbak Dia.
Boleh Mas, okay.
Thank you very much, Mbak Dia. So please introduce yourself and the institutions you are working for at the moment. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Dia Indrapati. I was a student in SGPP last year. I work as a facilitator and strategist consultant for several bureaus for the public sectors and private sectors. This is the questions that I need to ask to you, gentlemen. What do you think? What is the main requirement for us to be able to give the blue ocean strategy? Because based on your presentation and based on the books, I think blue ocean strategy is quite comprehensive and need a helicopter view to approach a certain problems. So before we have that strategy, what requirement do you think someone needs to be able to execute that strategy? I think that would be my question. Thank you.
Now, thank you for the question. You say you read the book. Did you read Blue Ocean Strategy or you read Blue Ocean Shift?
Blue Ocean Strategy, the first one.
Okay, good. Now, thank you for asking the questions. Okay, now your questions is that what are the requirement? What do you need to have to implement Blue Ocean Strategy, right? So when you read the book was written, especially Blue Ocean Strategy, is to give you the idea, the concept. Now, if I may explain to you, Blue Ocean Strategy is a way of thinking. How you think strategically. How do you think strategically without being constrained by the traditional, conventional, and existing setting? Now, most of us, especially when we go to school, we got a lot of training. Those training are very good. But training also help you to be very systematic, very analytical. And because you become very systematic, very analytical, you tend to be more aware and sensitive to what is the existing setting. So when you respond to the existing setting, then when you come up with the solutions, whatever the solution is, then you will find yourself that you're always coming out with the same solution. Because if Martin and I will go to the same school, right? We will look at things the same way. When we look at things the same way, we come up with the same solution. Now, if we are competing with one another, we will be coming up with a strategy similar to one another. So what I like to answer to your question is that when you talk about Blue Ocean Strategy as a way of thinking, the first thing you need to be able to prepare yourself when you want to think about Blue Ocean, besides just reading the book, is to make sure that you are open-minded and not take the conventional setting as the starting point. Number one. Number two, you always like to start Blue Ocean, not because you want to start the Blue Ocean. Martin has said that when we want to start Blue Ocean, we always start with a problem. Now, the understanding of the problem is very important. Now, everyone has problem, right? It's easy to start Blue Ocean. Everyone will have problem. But we ask ourselves the question, is your in the commercial world, we ask it, is your problem a $1 million problem or a $1 billion problem? 1 million or $1 billion problem? If you are solving a $1 million problem, chances are everyone is solving the same problem. So you just make your company become better by 1 million. But if you are solving a $1 billion problem like Airbnb, you're not solving a company problem. You're solving an industry problem. When you solve an industry problem, you restructure the industry like Airbnb. Then once you restructure, you solve a $1 billion problem, and your company will become a unicorn, a $1 billion company like Airbnb. And at the same time, because you're solving a $1 billion problem, your competitor is trained to solve only $1 million problem. They cannot do they cannot have a response to you immediately. Now come to public policy. Public policy is the same. Every government has got policy. Every ministry has got policy, right? Now, if every ministry has a problem, they solve the problem as a ministry problem, like the example I given. When I was asked to participate in a program at the invitation of the government, exactly, they thought it was a prisons problem. They wanted to ask the parliament to approve 6 brand new prisons. Each brand new prison is 300 million ringgit. So it was a prison department problem under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Then we say, no. Is it really? If you look at overcrowding itself, you look at infrastructure, real estate is a ministry problem. But you look at a societal impact, how it impacts society, come from overcrowding. But overcrowding created recidivism, high recidivism. It's a society problem, it's a national problem. Why should it be a prison department problem? So therefore, you need to look across to be able to solve it. Now, I answer you the question only 50% by saying that you understand that your way of thinking, you start the problem, choose the right problem to solve. Now, what the book didn't tell you is, how to make it happen. I think you heard in our presentation, right, and Martin's presentation, that we keep using the 3 propositions: value, profit, and people proposition. In the public sector, people proposition is the most important one. Okay, you can create value to the prison department, to the military camp, to the family of the light offender, and then they get reformed and instead of incarcerated. But in the same time, you create profit proposition for the government, save 1.6 or 1.7 billion ringgit. All these are but the most important is people proposition. So whenever government start a blue ocean initiative, we always start with a problem. We start to solve the society problem, and we always focus on bringing in as many stakeholders as possible at the beginning, not at the end. Now, I can't illustrate anymore to you unless you know all the other public policy programs we have done around the world. But every one of them start with this kind of thinking. So I hope I answered somewhat your questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it gives me some insight. Thank you. Makasih, Mas Wami.
Thank you very much, Badia. And then the next question is from Mas Yansa. Please go ahead, Mas Yansa. Please mention your institution as well. Yeah. Hello, Mas Yansa. Yes.
Okay. Hello. Yeah. It's a very interesting webinar. The thing that interests me the most is that in your presentation about Dubai, you mentioned about regulatory ease on starting businesses, on income tax for expatriates, and improving foreign direct investments, right? And Indonesia, at the moment, the government of Indonesia is trying to do so. I'm not sure whether this is included in Blue Ocean strategy or not, but by the omnibus law last year being passed, a lot of regulatory the regulations are being passed, and a lot of ease of starting businesses, ease of special economic zones, as we call it, kawasan ekonomi khusus, special economic zones are being opened, and a lot of tax holidays and tax incentives are being introduced. However, we are not seeing any effect in short term. And what do you think your views on Indonesian government strategy right now in passing the omnibus law and a lot of the regulations? Thank you.
So thank you, Bob, for that question. So I won't say I'm an expert on what's happening in Indonesia with respect to this omnibus law, but I do know that it was recently passed. I think it was last year, right? Somewhere around last year, it was passed. So it's very hard to say at this point because there are some confounding factors, right? We have this situation now with the pandemic, and so investor sentiment is not great all around. So it may take some time. I wouldn't know whether it would be a complete success or whether you would see Dubai level kind of transformation, but it's hard to say at this stage whether the omnibus law will be as intended by the government, right? So I think Indonesia's free zones also are a little bit different from Dubai. The Dubai example, or the Dubai case study that I talked about, their free trade zones are quite radical. You know, if you think about it, it's almost like having a state within a state. And the numbers themselves also are enormous. You have very few countries where within that certain square kilometer, right, you have more than 30 free trade zones. So Dubai has almost gone to a different level altogether of offering themselves up as a platform for an entire country, as a platform for foreign investors to come in and then build their products or services and then provide services within the rest of that region. Now in Indonesia, it's a country. So of course you have a lot more space, right? And if you wanted to, you could build that number of free trade zones. But Dubai is just a city, you know? And having that number of free trade zones is unheard of in the rest of the world. So I think it is also partly to do with how radical they were in their transformation and how they were able to ensure that while they had certain traditional customs already in Dubai that had been around for hundreds of years, right? And that could have then affected their local populace, right? This foreign involvement could have affected their local population. I think they were quite successful in terms of separating the effects of having a mass foreign involvement in their economy with the local population. So as you know, in Dubai, expats almost have an impossible route to citizenship. Nobody, very few, if not none of the expats can convert to citizenship. And this is one of the ways that Dubai has insulated their local population. And this idea also of making sure that there are separate legal regimes, so the more modern or more what you may call more Western or more economically liberal laws that are in these free trade zones are quite separate from the rest of the country, which is still mostly Sharia. So they were able to execute and implement this balance between the modern and the traditional culture that they still had. And I think they did this over many years quite successfully. I'm not sure how Indonesia will negotiate this compromise. It is always a little bit messy at the start. I agree with you. Maybe Dr. Bong, you would like to share your point of view as well?
Okay, now my personal view is that the implementation and the passing of the omnibus law is a very, very appropriate timing and a good start for Indonesia today, because that sends the signal that we are now coming out from your conventional, traditional setting. Now, the good things about the omnibus law there, because omnibus law also passed with a vision and an objective in mind. In other words, you have identified a set of problems you want to solve with this passing of the omnibus law. So these two things are already clear. Now, what is important in the next phase is that because omnibus law with a common objective, like I explained earlier on, it requires multi-ministry and inter-ministry collaboration and cooperation. So the policy, the next thing is the policy setting to achieve this common objective must be done across ministry, right? So there must be this across ministry thing. Then the next thing what will happen is that, now what will happen that there must be a coordinating unit. Because once you involve multi and inter-ministry policy, then implementation, you need coordinating unit. If you don't have a coordinating unit internally, you know that people go to work every day after the traffic jam, they go to the office, they will behave the same silo, in the same silo. So you need to have this coordinating unit to make sure that policy has been set, inter and multi-ministry, implemented with a coordinating agency, or else the infighting silo will always remain. Last but not least, when you internally have a coordinating unit, what about externally? So does the customer, does the investor, okay, will have a one-stop shop service or not? So internally, you must have a coordinating unit. Externally, you must have a one-stop shop, right? And last but not least, they must be what we call, because of coordinating unit, they must measure the progress and continuously to tweak and change. Now, this is very important because whenever you want to make sure that your policy work, you tweak and change, you frustrate a lot of people. People will think that you are not, you are not thorough enough. Actually, it's not. When you want to do something totally brand new, you want to do something that is inter-agency, multi-agency, and you invite new development to your country, you need to keep changing and keep tweaking. Now, that brings up to the last point. The very last point is the people proposition. Because when you do this thing, do we have a concerted effort to properly explain, communicate internally and externally to galvanize mass understanding and mass support? Now, idea of passing this is timely, is good. Implementation, what I explained to you, is what we normally do as Blue Ocean public policy advisor.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much for your answers. I'm right now involved in the omnibus law implementations. I'm working at the Prospera. It's a Indonesia-Australia partnership on economic governance. And you're right, under the Ministry of Coordinating Ministry of Economic, they are the ones who are trying hard to orchestrate the implementation across not only line ministries, institutions, but also regions, because Indonesia has more than 500 cities and regions, and we have 34 provinces. That might be different from the ones that take shape in Dubai and probably other parts of the world.
So
But yeah.
Yeah, I say, yeah, you said it very correctly. I'm very glad that you are now doing this. I'm very, very glad. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully we can still keep in touch. If I'm allowed, I would like to have your contacts so that we can probably have a further discussion. Thank you so much and success.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mas Yansa. Mas Yansa was our students 3 or 4 years ago, actually.
5
years ago.
You're very loyal students.
Yes, actually, we invite all the alumni and faculty members and all the students, and I think you mentioned earlier, because I think you mentioned is a good point, because you mentioned that the blue oceans cannot apply to the public policy as well, not only on the business sectors. Yeah, because all our graduates mostly they got involved in the policy making, strategies in this country. And related to Mas Yansa questions, there is a question from Jabez Chan. He was our student as well 2 years ago, and he's an entrepreneur actually. And I'm interested to enroll to BOGN course. Is there any coupon code that we could apply to the program?
What is it? See the last question. He's interested in enrolling.
Okay.
So just like, yeah.
Very a typical entrepreneur, cost savings.
The answer is yes. We have a learning department. I think Blue Ocean, we have a consulting department. We have a training department. Under the training department, we have a learning department. Yes, we can certainly connect him to our learning department. And because of this program, and we can, or rather, Martin can do something to say that, well, participants coming out from this program, we can give them some very special treatment. That is definitely, I leave it to Martin can do that. We definitely can have that.
Yeah. Thank you, Pak Martin and Dr. Bong. And I just want to ask questions. Mr. Bong and also Mr. Martin, when we are doing the, especially to find the problem in the beginning, because the blue oceans always, put the problem in, analyzing many things. And then do you think, especially for Indonesian at the moment, in our education sectors, not many actually education institution teaching critical thinking course in our school. In terms of this, what's your point of view regarding this, critical thinking course, or related to the Blue Oceans strategy? Yeah.
Critical thinking is one of the skill set that everybody should have and can hone. Absolutely, it is not about critical thinking and blue ocean thinking. Because when you actually want to create a blue ocean program, you actually go through a series of activities. Let's say, for example, if an organization come to us and say, okay, we want to do a blue ocean. Okay, now we typically will not say, okay, let's do a blue ocean because that's a good business for us. We don't want good business. We want good outcome. We only want good outcome. We say, okay, before you start the blue ocean, do you have a problem to solve? What kind of problem you solve? So depending on whether you are able to pinpoint down the problem and you know what kind of problem you solve, with this one, we go through the first stage of engaging you to get you to reimagine. We get you to reimagine your world in terms of customer perspective, in terms of value and price perspective, in terms of competition perspective. When we get you to reimagine your world as you are today, you suddenly realize that whether the problem you want to solve is worth solving or not. Maybe it's worth solving, maybe it's not worth solving. Maybe you need to reframe your problem to solve it differently. Then you get the outcome. Now, this whole first part is called reimagining, to confirm and to reframe and to prioritize the problem you want to solve. Now, when you come to the second part where critical thinking becomes very important, once you reimagine your world and you decide to solve different problem or differently, you need a critical thinking. So now we say, okay, now we will typically combine your critical thinking with design thinking together. Your critical thinking is important, but critical to who? To yourself, or design thinking, you have empathy from your end user perspective. So we typically combine critical thinking and design thinking together to form what we call the next stage of idea. We call diagnostic. So when you want to diagnose the problem, once you decide the problem, you want to diagnose the problem, you need critical thinking and design thinking. But critical thinking from you, design thinking from the other side. So once we come out with a design thinking and a critical thinking through the diagnostic phase, you probably will arrive at what we call a hypothesis. So when you want to solve a problem, you must have your own hypothesis. Just like when we do our PhD, we try to solve a problem. We have to have a hypothesis. You don't have a hypothesis, university would allow you to dig a PhD, right? So it's the same thing. You need to have a very practical hypothesis. So you want to go into a hypothesis, you go into what exploration stage. So you actually go to using all our blue ocean thinking process to go into explore different ideas and possibility. And last but not least, we go into the synthesize phase. Synthesize phase, this is where the important, we talk about stakeholder. So when we synthesize, we bring everybody together, we bring all the ideas together, then we synthesize solutions. So the synthesizing of solution is not just about ideas, it's about people buying to create a three proposition: value, profit, and people. So, Paoni, to answer your question is that I try to answer your question in a longer way, because to say yes, critical thinking is important. Then you ask me, okay, why is it important? How is it contrast with blue ocean? Actually, it's not. It's an underlying skill you need when you're doing blue ocean, especially in the second phase. And we combine with the design thinking, bang, you get a very different outcome.
Wow, thank you very much. I think most of the students, they have to learn about that, just only critical thinking, but also the design thinking as well. So thank you very much for the insight. And the next question, I invite some of the students. Is there any more questions? Mazaki? Hello? Any more questions?
I think that's it.
Hello?
We can hear you. I think
He's asking this.
Oh.
Yeah. You may ask question directly, or you can write in the chat box. No more questions? Yeah. Okay, Dr. Bong and Mr. Martin, probably while waiting for the question from our participants, you may actually tell the participants how, earlier Jabez asked you about the, the course that you offer. Probably, you can explain about the course that you offer in your program.
Our course. Okay. All right. So maybe I can. There are two kinds of courses that we offer. One is for academic institution, and one is for commercial organization. Now, in the academic institution, we offer our courses. We typically teach Blue Ocean program, either in a private sector. We say we teach startup program. The startup program is very interesting. So we offer university startup program. We offer high school startup program. We have competition for startup program as well. And we typically make sure that when you want to start a business, you want to get your strategy right up front. You have a choice between market competing or market creating. So we don't only teach Blue Ocean, we teach the differences of Blue Ocean and Red Ocean. I mean, you want to compete, we all teach you to compete. You want to create, we teach you how to create. So this is at academic level. So academic level, we mostly teach Blue Ocean as business startup. But we also create curriculum for INSEAD Business School. INSEAD Business School is our concept center. Okay. Now, INSEAD Business School, we actually create curriculum as an elective for the MBA student in INSEAD. And the INSEAD Business School, typically, they also do the same thing. They have a project to do a startup project. So you can see in the academic environment, we always teach with a project. That means our teaching methodology is project, and we teach startup project, and we still teach value innovation. And the project is a lot of group participation. It's rather than just online learning or just about classroom environment. It's not lecture, it's startup. So that you actually learn by applying the concept. And most of the startup actually, after they have finished their learning, they actually can go outside and start a real business. One group of our INSEAD Business School, they did the program with us. Then after that, they actually went outside to start a new company to finance all MBA students who have not enough money to pay for MBA's tuition fee. They have a Blue Ocean financing for them. So it's a very interesting program called Protege Finance. It's actually started up by the student who studied in INSEAD, did the program, they went outside. And this is one example, there are many. Now, that is for the university or institution. Now, for higher learning institutions, like for example, public policy school, we also work with public policy school. We used to work with the Malaysia School of Public Policy, as well as the Hungarian, what's his name there? George Soros.
Central Eastern
School of Public Policy School. So we also explain to them. Now that one, we also create what we call, we create public policy case study for them. So we don't teach a program by ourselves, because this one, we always become a particular module or adjunct professor to go in to say that we give you a particular module. Say, for example, like this is what we are doing like that. But we do that program on demand, depending on public policy school, what they want us to do, because public policy school is very different. Okay? We always customize our participation and our contribution alongside with the faculty to do whatever they want us to do. Very different from private university. We just do, whether it's high school, undergrads, or even INSEAD, is a startup project. Now, those are the one we do. Now, on the consulting side, we actually roll out our sleeve and roll out our pants and jump into the water with our client, like in the Malaysia CRP program and many other countries as well. As we actually today we are doing one program with the Singapore government on how to bring creativity into new business startup program. So we actually run special program as consulting program with governments, civil servants, whatever policy they come out with, whatever initiative they come out with. If anything that involve strategy and innovation, it need not be blue ocean. Strategy and innovation, we will help by creating the program, delivering the program, as well as creating the infrastructure to sustain the initiative. The creation of the infrastructure to sustain the initiative is very important. Can you imagine the program we just shared with you, the CRP? It's been around for 10 years. It's still working. How is it? Because we created the underlying infrastructure. Anything else?
No.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Bong, and also Mr. Martin. I think the last question from one of our students, as you presented earlier, the strategy must be multi-level, multi-stakeholder, and another multi. In Indonesia is a big challenge where we should start to solve it.
Do you want to answer? I want to answer.
So let me start off first. I would say that you're absolutely right? And like we presented earlier on, we were talking about how the various stakeholders in the public policy sector very often outnumber the number of stakeholders that we find in the commercial sector. So this is a continuing challenge, right? That is why it is so important that when we first start off thinking about, okay, this is the problem that we want to solve, how do we get our hands dirty and how do we put in the effort to solve it sustainably, right? We often begin with a single agency or a single ministry first, right? So that everybody, most of the stakeholders or most of the moving parts are still within one house, so to speak, right? And then what we do is we work across the departments within that ministry to figure out a game-changing solution for that ministry or for that agency. So we work with what you may know as low-hanging fruit first, right? Single ministry or single agency working across silos, because often within the ministry themselves, they have silos, right? And then once we find that we can showcase or we can exhibit these quick wins, right? Then you find that actually the people proposition about the program or the project starts to take on its own life, because people want to be they want to be involved in this project because they can see already very visibly that there are successes to it. So the key understanding is that you don't start aiming for the sky. You always start small first, aim for quick wins so that the people who are working in it can feel motivated to continue working on the project, and people who are outside of that project can understand the value of being part of this. And then you find that more people outside will want to be part of it. Then it's easier to work across ministries or across industries if you're in the commercial sector, because people already have that buy-in.
So our personal experience in implementing public policy across region is that we find that when we start something small within the agency, we have control. But even though it's within agency under the control, the important thing I mentioned just now, before you even do that, you must have a coordinating unit, right? The coordinating unit must still coordinate this agency, even though it's a single agency. So during the coordination, when this single agency present their outcome, it's being observed and learned by all the other agencies who have not yet partaken in this program yet. So they all watch on the fence. So we've seen that they all watch. When suddenly the fruit to start to bear, everybody want to be on the bandwagon, because they don't want, they can see the potential success of this program like the CRP. They don't want to be missed out. They want their agency, their department, their ministry name to be part of it. Then you can see everybody apply to be part of it. Apply. They say, oh, I want to be part of it, no? So, okay, my agency can contribute this vacant land here. Oh, my agency got a building there we are not using. Can we donate this building to be part of this program so that we can be part of the program? Now, what I'm saying is not a theory. It's not a suggestion. It's what we have lived through this program. This is how it happened. So, like Martin said, it's very important. Although you start with a big vision, with a coordinating agency, you start with a single unit first, and everybody watch. Very interesting.
Thank you very much. And based on your experience, what is the most challenging actually?
The challenging is to manage the two-tier stakeholder. The politician stakeholder and the civil servant stakeholder. Every country has got a way to put the two aligned. Every country has got their own peculiarity, how the politicians layer function and how the government civil servant layer function. Now, you fail to bridge the two, that is the most difficult part. So therefore, you must have high enough what we call sponsor. Let's call it. You need to be a very high level sponsor whose job is only to make these two come together for the program of an initiative.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope that answered your question, Malindo. And is there any more question? Oh, I don't think so. So once again, Dr. Bong and Mr. Martin, thank you very much for sharing on the Blue Ocean's perspective and strategy to our colleagues. And I hope that this, will continue, not only now, but I'm sure that the students and the participants today, they got a lot of the, probably they have to think actually, what is the strategy now? Because I think it's very crucial for them as well as a policy makers when they find a problem and try to solve the problem. So this workshop actually give insight to everybody to think about how the strategy that can be used to overcome or to solve the problem, not only for the institution but also from themselves. And once again, on behalf of School of Government and Public Policy Indonesia, I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Bong and Mr. Martin, and I hope that our cooperation will continue. And there are a lot of requests actually. They send a message to me and they want to contact you directly, and I will share your contact, Mr. Martin and Dr. Bong, to our students. And if they have any question or projects that they're actually working on, then they can come to you. So once again, thank you very much. And is there anything that you want to share?
I would like to thank on my behalf of my institutions and on behalf of my two professors, Professor Chan Kim, Professor Mabon, who are the #1 thinker and the creator of this this program. Is actually actually we work directly for them. And on behalf of them, I'd like to thank your institution for giving us such privilege to share our work with you and your student. That it has been a wonderful experience for us. We are also very excited about being able to continue our collaboration and working with whatever program you like to have, and whatever shape and form, Martin will be your man.
Yes.
Thank you, Pak Oni. And also, we want to thank the people who have attended today's webinar as well. And thank you for your questions. Very, very informative, very interesting.
So thank you very much, and all the participants just check our regular leadership talk, and in the next week we are having another leadership talk, and just check our social media. Thank you very much, and this is the workshop, upcoming workshop. Then we have next week on the 23rd, we have Introduction to Research Writing by Dr. Novianto. And 28, we are having the new leadership in the COVID-19 experience in the public sectors, public and private sector by Julian Steinmeier. And also we have Mastering Public Speaking by Cristela Venicianti, and also Dr. Pony Janleo on the clever copywriting to sell you and yourself. So check our social media. Once again, thank you very much and have a good day. Stay safe.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.